Hello, welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. In the years since COVID impacted consumer spending, there's been some changes at the retail side. We've seen changes in how consumers shop, where they shop, what influences their decision-making process. All that stuff has shifted. And here to talk with us today about what retailers, wholesalers are doing this coming season to appease grillers with value-added meat features is Brian Earnest, lead protein analyst with CoBank. Welcome, Brian. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
So we're gonna start, Brian, by turning it over to you to walk us through a few slides and to talk to us about the supply side of things and what we're looking at here.
Yeah, it was great thoughts on the consumer side, and I think there's quite a bit from the producer side as well that starts the conversation. Thinking about meat supply this year and how we could see some changes leading into this period. First quarter of the year, overall meat production was up, just under 2% from a year ago. This supply has been steadily growing over the last several years. We had a dip back in 2020 with COVID-related production issues then, but since then, we continue to see the overall meat supply gravitate higher year over year. Now, there's some expectations this year with tighter cattle supplies and the feed constraints, as they lay into the animal protein segment that suggests that, we might have moderately lower supplies during the peak of grilling season this year when compared with a year ago. And part of that, I mentioned the cattle supplies, leading into overall beef production. And at least through the first several weeks of the year, we have seen overall federally inspected beef production undercut year-ago levels in nearly all of the weeks since or leading up into the grilling period. Now it's been hovering at or above the 5-year average, but still overall tighter beef production numbers overall. Now that coincides with what we've seen has been stronger than usual demand on the beef side over the years. From this chart's looking at the years from 2000 through 2015 as being conditions where beef consumption or pounds disappearance in the system were declining, and at the same time prices were rising. And overall, since then, 2015 through 2022. While we've seen a rising price environment for beef, pounds consumed actually increased through that period. My expectation, this is really just looking at forecast for 2023 on pounds consumed versus overall retail prices. We'll continue to see a high price environment from a retail standpoint, maybe a little bit of a decline in terms of pounds consumed, but still very strong demand situation for beef overall, despite those higher prices. Moving over to the chicken side of the equation, this is a chart just looking at the production, a range that green area is the 5-year range for ready to cook chicken production in the U.S. And within that range, at least the last 11 periods, or of the last 15 periods, there have been 11 record high months. Just suggesting that overall there's a swelling of chicken production within the system available to deploy on markets that are looking for a value item really to introduce to the consumer here in 2023. Breaking that down into cuts, this is something I look at pretty frequently. The wholesale values that we're seeing on individual cuts, and I think pointing out here really is just that during the first quarter, those beef items, they were up versus the 5-year average, and most of them up year over year. Briskets is one that we actually saw a decline in terms of the wholesale values that were reported in the channel. So maybe an item that we see a little bit of relief passed on through the system and to the consumer. Overall pork prices in the wholesale system down year over year, and ribs, looking at back ribs for grilling season, both down year over year and versus the 5-year average. So plenty of opportunity, it looks like, there for retailers and food service channels to work with ribs to put some promotional activity together. And finally, just kind of looking at the chicken side of it, down year over year, we had those really strong chicken prices that came into the system last year from a wholesale perspective, but up just a little bit over the 5-year average. So still seeing some inflation from a long-term perspective in chicken on that boneless, skinless breast meat, but down versus year ago levels. Now thinking about that retail side of it, the overall consumer price index for all meats, which includes things like dairy and eggs, has been hovering at some stronger levels here in over the last several months. Looking back into, I guess, into 2021, we've seen those inflationary numbers come down from a high level. But specifically looking at the meats, items like ground beef, chicken breasts, and pork chops, those items, they continue to remain high relative to, kind of the long-term average. But some of those prices are coming down. Those chicken breasts, we have seen retail price points come down somewhat here to start out 2023. Pork prices have remained stubbornly high, and beef has really kind of moderated at those higher levels. And finally, just kind of look at overall spending and how that relates to the consumers' dollars that they have available. From a nominal perspective, grocery prices or the spending at grocery from consumers continues to rise. But when you account for real wage growth, we're actually seeing a decline in terms of the dollars that are being spent at grocery. So, that just suggests that consumers are pulling back as a result of those higher prices that they are seeing at retail.
So, Brian, when you say that they're pulling back on spending, what's that having any influence when it comes to, say, that whole at-home, away-from-home food expenditures? Are you seeing some shifts there, or what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, kind of from a high level, what I was looking at in the first quarter, March food away from home actually saw dollars spent rise. And I think it was up around 15% year over year, which is kind of counterintuitive to that thought that, you would think consumers would spend less, put in a higher dollar spend for their food, they'd spend less money away from home. Some related this to revenge spending, that folks were, encouraged by their inner needs to go out and spend more money at restaurants. I do think spring break kind of played a role in that as well, that, folks were traveling a little bit more. And as a result, those dollars spent away from home continue to rise through at least the first quarter. So once we get through the second quarter a little bit more, I think we will start to see the tighter dollar spend or tighter budget work its way into the food at home or versus food away from home.
Do we generally tend to see when the grilling season starts that consumers tend to maybe eat at home more because they're doing more grilling?
Yeah, I think this is a period where folks are excited to fire up the grill again, and get outside a little bit more. We maybe had a little bit of a delay this year in some of the northern regions. And so I would assume that most folks are excited to do a little bit more of that. And we saw through the pandemic era that, there were a lot of folks that kind of invested in that backyard oasis, right? They built kind of an area for grilling and entertaining because there wasn't as much opportunity to do that outside of the home. So they brought it into the home. And those were pretty strong investment dollars put into that. Folks bought pellet grills and that sort of thing. And so I think they're excited to start using them again and, maybe looking more at value cuts this year as opposed to some of the stronger dollar items.
Yeah, you mentioned ribs as being perhaps an opportunity. What other cuts are you thinking might really be kind of hot on the grill this year? What are consumers going to go for? Or what are wholesalers and retailers going to push?
And that's kind of important too, right? Thinking about what retailers probably have the opportunity to push, and it does look like pork, at least ribs and back ribs. Local market here in the Memphis area, I'm kind of looking at things and what they're doing there. It does seem like there's more pork on the ads this year, but the price points aren't necessarily, super attractive from a historical standpoint. Even on ad, I'm not seeing necessarily like, some encouragement to expand their spending. Sometimes you get like a BOGO deal, in the past where somebody's going to pick up two of them, and that really helps kind of push some volume through the system. And not quite seeing that yet, but I do think, to that point, we'll probably see some more value items. Thinking about sausage type items this year. All beef franks might be another one where, I think that was pretty big in 2018, where it seemed like every week there was like all beef franks were on the menu, and you get that premiumization out of an item that it's got that higher quality feel to it, but you can still kind of throw it on the grill and have an enjoyable offering. Brisket was one that I think is surprising, thinking about an opportunity from a wholesale perspective to do some work with this year. So that's an item that maybe more folks are looking forward to doing some work with. I mentioned pellet grills, and that's something where you've got a kind of a big piece of cooking device that, if you want to do a brisket, you actually kind of have to have something like that to do it in a grilling form. So I am encouraged there. I do think we'll probably see some more of those value items pop up with more regularity. I'm seeing more dark meat from a chicken perspective show up on ads, and I think that'll continue here through the grilling season as well.
When we look at the retail level, kind of pre-COVID, it almost seemed like there was more adjustment at the meat case. When the wholesale price declined, perhaps that was pushed through to the meat case a little more than what appears to be happening these days. Is that a permanent change, or what are you seeing out there in that regard?
Well, I think it does seem like things go up very rapidly, right? If you're a consumer looking at it, and then that they come down very, very slowly. We've been through a period of instability in terms of supply assurance the last 3 years. I think last year was one of those years where retailers were kind of testing the waters of, they didn't really know what production was going to look like. This year they've got more supply assurance, but a lot of that activity that they think about for featuring is really put together. The thought process is put together in the first quarter of the year for, grilling period. And so the second and third quarter ad promotions are kind of worked into the system in that first quarter. And the wholesale markets weren't necessarily conducive to, or weren't very encouraging necessarily for retailers to really work with that. So what we're seeing right now is really an impact of what was going on in that first quarter. Interestingly, chicken prices, declined very rapidly in the fourth quarter last year. Breast meat, I think wholesale markets were hitting kind of historic highs last summer, 350 area, somewhere around there. And wholesale markets were down around $1, and I think maybe even deeper than that in some area, or for certain items. And that's really encouraging, I think, for retailers to work with when they've got a value item, one that they can show the consumer, hey, I can get you a price point on a protein that you'll be happy with, and something that they have a lot of availability. Well, I'm still not really seeing that kind of show up at retail yet. We've seen prices come down on chicken, but not necessarily to the degree that was suggested during that period. So, and that could be that it wasn't necessarily product that was slated for retail, but more it was trying to find a home food service and hasn't quite gotten there yet.
So we talk a lot about value. We talk a lot about price here today, but at the same time, we're also hear a lot about sustainability and organic and, no antibiotics ever. And that's what consumers want. Where do you see that line at this point? Is it still very much a price focused market out there at the retail level, or is it really seeing a change and a switch over at this point?
It's interesting. There's some survey work that's done out by some of the academics. I think Kansas State's one that they put together a meat survey and try and get a feel for that. And it's interesting to see that kind of data. And typically that number one attribute that consumers are really is very important to them is price. That kind of continues to sit at the top level. There's changes in between, I think, of the different attributes. As you get down through, I think, several different attributes that they look at. But overall, that price still kind of continues to be fizzling or supported from a consumer perspective on what they're looking for when they're making the decision at the shelf.
Another thing I believe you've looked at in terms of beef, it's the grading and what we're looking at in terms of what's going to be available this summer, select choice, et cetera. So walk us through what you found there, or what your thinking is there.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So, that what I was kind of looking at, we've seen a really a strong supply of high quality beef in the system, and I think that's one of the things that's attributed to the strong demand that we're seeing from a beef perspective. Consumers are able to get a really high quality product, kind of at the everyday grocery store level. They're seeing choice or even a more high quality product than that at grocery. And part of that is strong supply genetics, the feed conditions where they've been, and the liquidation phase that we're seeing from a cattle perspective. Some of that high quality beef in the system has kind of made its way through the supply chain, and we're seeing that in the grading that's kind of showing up this year. I think through the first several weeks of the year, or at least the first several months of the year. The amount of prime that's available in the system is down about 2% from where it was 2 years ago. It's down 1% from a year ago. So about 10% of overall beef production is currently prime, where it was around 12% 2 years ago. So I do think that continues to tighten in terms of availability of that really high quality beef that's available.
That's going to influence prices too, I would imagine, on the beef side of the market.
Yes, I think over the last several years, consumers have really clamored to that high quality beef item, and while they may kind of reduce the amount of occasions that they're purchasing that high quality beef, they're probably going to have to end up spending a little bit more for it, and will be willing to spend a little bit more for it for those occasions.
So, any final insights you want to leave our audience with here today?
Well, I think just kind of a personal note, this is a great time of the year to start thinking about grilling season. I know folks are excited about it. It'll be interesting to see how things play out this year. Another different year for the consumer and analysts to be looking at. So looking forward to kind of doing a recap later on this year.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for your time here today. Brian Ernst, lead protein analyst with CoBank. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Our thanks to those of you that have joined us here today. We know you're busy, and we really appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time here. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 sessions are available on demand at feedstuffs365.com. So feel free to go back, watch them at any time, share them with your colleagues. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.